Amen. Well, it's been an incredible morning already. I'm not even going to pretend that anything I have to say can match up with the stories we heard and just the people and the moments where God collided with us as we saw four people declare that they wanted to just publicly identify with Jesus. But I do have some thoughts as we continue our Life App series that I hope will just encourage us and fill us up even more so that we can walk out of Revision this week and just pour out love and change all over this world that God created us to love and change. A few weeks ago, I took my son Jimmy shopping for a new baseball glove because he's doing Little League this year, and he tried on like 50 different gloves in the store until he found the one that fit just perfect, and we took it home and oiled it up and began the process of breaking it in, because new leather gloves are pretty rigid, and there's a lot of stuff that you can do to break in a baseball glove, but the most important and most effective way to do it is to use it. And so I took him out in the yard and we started playing catch, and over the last few weeks of playing catch, I realized something about my kid, because the first day, we played catch very shortly, and we played a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more every day, but he can only stand to drop it about 5 times before he wants to quit. And the first day, because he hadn't played catch for a really, really long time, he caught about 8, and after he dropped his 5th one, he told me he didn't want to play anymore. And over the course of the last few weeks, he's gotten a lot better. He's gotten into the rhythm of it, and he catches most of them. But at 5 drops, he wants to go inside. Like every single time he doesn't catch the ball, you can see it on his face. It is excruciating to him. And it's really thought-provoking to play catch with him and realize this about my kid. And because I look at him and I think, number one, I was praying that he would get his mom's sense of toughness and not mine. My kid is such a whiner, and I have only me to blame. But number 2, I look at this, and I see him, like, no matter how many he catches, no matter how great he's doing, 5 drops and he's done, I think discouragement is a crazy beast. And it is. It is. Discouragement is a disease that's unique to human beings, and it's one that's universal. Like every single one of us in here this morning has felt discouraged, and everybody outside these walls has felt discouraged, probably deeply discouraged at some point in our lives. Some of us have felt discouraged this week or this morning. Some of us feel discouraged right now. And because discouragement is such a part of life in this broken world, because it's such a natural response to us when things get frustrating and things don't go right, because it festers inside our souls and keeps us from living the lives that God designed and created and calls us to live, I want to talk about discouragement this morning. As part of this Life App series, I want to ask, what's the app that God has? What's the grid that he has for us to apply? What's the lens that we can look at discouragement through so that we can overcome it and live the lives that we were created for? How do we deal with discouragement God's way? I don't think step 1, if we're going to battle discouragement, is to figure out where it comes from. And I'm not going to pretend that I have an exhaustive list this morning of where discouragement comes from, but I think there are 4 big things in our lives that contribute to discouragement. And the first one is fatigue. When we're tired, when we're weary, when we're worn down, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, it's easy to get discouraged because our defenses aren't up and we're not thinking clearly and we're just too exhausted to fight it. Fatigue contributes to discouragement. And the second one is frustration. All right, when things aren't going our way, when things aren't working the way that we expected them to work or wanted them to work, it's really easy to get discouraged. When we fill the baptism tank with way too much water and now my socks are wet and I hate wet socks, it's easy to get discouraged when things don't go our way. Okay, stuff happens. And the thing is, when we get frustrated, we tend to take our eyes off the goal. We tend to take our eyes off the vision, off the end, off the thing that we were pursuing, and we tend to focus on the little details and the minutia and the things that are frustrating us. Frustration and discouragement are not the same thing, but frustration leaves us vulnerable to discouragement. And the third thing is failure. Failure happens. Our plans fall apart, deals fall through, projects collapse, relationships break down. We miss the point when we're supposed to come up in the service and preach because we're trying to get the armpit-sized stain dried off in the dryer, okay? Failure happens. It's a part of life. Failure happens every single day of our lives, and there's something inside of us, this little voice in our heads every time we experience failure that says, quit, you should just quit. And so it's easy to get discouraged when we fail. And the fourth one is this, fear. And this one, I think, is the biggest one. It probably isn't the first one that we'd list. If I said, what do you think causes discouragement in your life? It isn't the one that we're most likely to admit causes discouragement in our life. But I think very frequently when we are discouraged, fear is the reason. Fear is the driving factor. I mean, the root word of discourage is courage. And discourage is this Middle French word that means away with courage. Away with courage. And our courage abandons us when fear is the lens through which we see our world. When we get nervous, we start asking the questions, oh, what if someone criticizes me? What will people think? We focus on responsibility. What if this is more than I can handle? What if I can't do it? What if I can't be who I've been asked to be? When we focus on our failures and we think, how could I ever succeed again? What if I blow it just like I blew it the last time? When we get scared about a future that we can't see, what's going to happen next? I don't know what the next day holds, the next week holds, the next month holds, the next few years hold. I'm scared. And we start to see our world through the lens of fear. Discouragement follows pretty quickly. Fatigue, frustration, fear, and failure, and a whole lot of other things. There are a whole lot of things that cause discouragement in our lives, and it's just a very real part of being human. It's a very real part of doing life in a broken, messed up world. And I want us to know something about discouragement this morning. Like before we even dive any further into it, I want us to walk out of here, every single one of us, knowing that we know this thing. Discouragement is not from God. Ever. Never. Discouragement is not from God. Here's the thing. Anytime you accomplish something in the world, anytime you do something good, anything good, whether it's big or small, that adds value to your world, that adds beauty to your life and the lives of the people around you, that lives out your created purpose. Anytime you do something that makes even the slightest difference for God in this world, you have an enemy that wants to destroy you. The Bible is really clear about that. It says that we have a spiritual enemy named the devil who's on a mission to steal, kill, and destroy everything that matters to the heart of God. There's even a verse in the Bible that says the devil is like a lion prowling around for someone to devour. And I want us to understand the theological implications of that. Lions are in the cat family, so there's a direct biblical link between cats and Satan. Just so we're clear, so you know. It is what it is. But the truth is, in life, we're going to fail sometimes on our own accord, and we're going to fail sometimes because we face opposition. We're going to face opposition not always because we're doing something wrong, but often because we're doing something right and we're making a difference. And opposition and failure and frustration and fear can lead to discouragement. But we got to know that discouragement is never from God. Real quick aside, though, disappointment sometimes is. Disappointment and discouragement are two totally different things. They flow from the same thing sometimes. Disappointment leads to discouragement sometimes, but disappointment and discouragement are not the same thing. And sometimes, if you're going to follow Jesus, you're going to be disappointed. Because God's path is not always the easy, smooth one. It just isn't. That's not how it works. Read the Bible. Look at the life of Paul. If God's path is supposed to be easy and smooth, God hated Paul. I don't think God hated Paul. Like God so often treats us like he's a blacksmith. He puts us into the fire so that he can take us out and he can hammer us into the shape of the vision that he has for our lives. And it hurts sometimes, and it's confusing sometimes, and it's disappointing sometimes, but it's grace always. It's grace always, even if it's harsh grace, and it takes us and it shapes us into the people that God created us to be, and to people that make a difference for Jesus in the world, that look like Jesus in the world, and to people we could never be outside of the fire and the hammer of God. Disappointment is going to happen, but discouragement doesn't have to, because discouragement is a choice we make about how to react to trouble in our lives. I'm going to say that again. Discouragement is a choice that we make about how we're going to react to difficult situations in our lives. I love the way the author F. Scott Fitzgerald puts it. He says, trouble has no necessary connection with discouragement. Discouragement has a germ of its own, as different from trouble as arthritis is different from a stiff joint. So the question for us is, what are we going to do about it? Like, how are we going to battle discouragement so we don't fall prey to it? How are we going to overcome discouragement when we are discouraged? Because we've all been discouraged, some of us are discouraged, and all of us are going to get to that point again. Well, there's this really cool story in the Bible about a guy named Nehemiah. And I want to take a look at it this morning. I wish we had more time to take a look at it because I love the story of Nehemiah. And someday we'll spend a month or 2 months or 7 months on Nehemiah. It's one of my favorite books of the Bible. But this morning I just want to briefly look at it in chapter 4. If you have your Bibles or your phones, you can crack them open to Nehemiah chapter 4. If you don't have them, don't worry, the words will be on the screen. If you don't own a Bible, grab one from the back. But Nehemiah is this guy who gives us a really cool picture of how God invites us to respond to discouragement. How God invites us to battle against the choice of discouragement in our lives. In Nehemiah chapter 4, here's the background. Nehemiah is a nobody. He's one of the most insignificant people on the planet Earth when he's alive. Okay, he lives in this time where the people of Israel have been captured and they've been exiled. The Assyrians came, they shattered Jerusalem's walls, and they carried off a bunch of their people. And Nehemiah is a servant to the king, Artaxerxes. But he's not just any servant, he's a special kind of servant called a cupbearer. Here's what his life consisted of. Every time Artaxerxes was thirsty, because in the ancient world they didn't have a real good test for poison, he poured himself a glass of whatever he wanted to drink, and then he handed it to Nehemiah to make sure no one poisoned it. And then Nehemiah took a sip, and then everyone watched him for a little bit, and if he keeled over and died, they were like, ooh, whew, that guy's dead. We need a new cupbearer. And if he didn't keel over and die, Artaxerxes was like, sweet, I'm thirsty, give me that drink. Okay, this is how important the life of Nehemiah was. He was a poison tester. Okay, didn't matter. And then one day he heard something. He heard that the walls of Jerusalem had still not been rebuilt. That after they got knocked down, they were just lying in rubble. And the people living there, God's people, were vulnerable to being attacked and robbed. And God started tugging at his heart. This nobody, this little insignificant guy whose life did not matter to the world, felt this tug at his heart. And God told him, do something, do something, do something. He thought, what can I do? What can I do? But finally he's like, okay, God is tugging at my heart for this. I have to do something. So he went to the king and he asked, can I go rebuild the wall? I'm not a carpenter. I have no experience, but can I get some supplies and can I go back to Jerusalem and rebuild this wall? Because my people are vulnerable and the temple is vulnerable. And the king said yes. And so he went on this mission for God and everything was smooth sailing after that. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was really hard, even though it was something God tugged at his heart to do. Even though he was on a mission from God, he met with incredible opposition because it was a difficult task ahead of him and because he had a whole lot of enemies who were making good money robbing the people of Jerusalem that did not want a wall. And this is where we're at in chapter 4 of Nehemiah, okay? This is what it says, beginning in verse 1. When Sanballat, which by the way, this is one of the enemies, that's a killer name for a villain, right? Sanballat. Some comic book should steal that. When Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews in the presence of his associates in the army of Samaria. He said, what are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are? And then Tobiah, the Ammonite, who was at his side, and you got to read Tobiah in a Philadelphian accent, because he was an Ammonite, and the capital of Ammon was Philadelphia. So I'm going to try that. So the Bible is exciting, you guys, all right? So Tobiah, the guy from Philly who was at his side, said, what are they building? Even a fox can climb up and would break down their wall of stones. Hear us, our God, for we're despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. So we rebuilt the wall till it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against us. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Meanwhile, the people of Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out. There's so much rubble, we can't rebuild the wall. Also, our enemies said, before they know it or see it, we'll be right there among them and kill them and put an end to the work. So here's Nehemiah. Here's the people of Jerusalem. They're doing this important work for God, the one God called them to. But they reached the point of discouragement. They're tired because they've been working really hard and building walls is hard. They're frustrated because they don't have the right supplies. It's just rubble and it's burned. And they're terrified. They're terrified because these guys who've been attacking them basically said, if you try to build that wall, if you try to close it off, we're going to come kill you. So they're fearful. They don't know what the future holds. And because they're fearful and they're afraid and they're tired, they get discouraged. And they come to Nehemiah and they're just like, we can't do this anymore. We got halfway there. Halfway's going to have to do. We can't even do it. And they got these enemies, Sanballat and Tobiah, who are threatening to attack. They're just broken down. Our strength is giving out. We can't do it. I think what's so cool about this story is like we can relate to them. I can relate to them. In part, we can relate to these weary, tired, frustrated people because we have a lot of Sanballats and Tobiahs in our life. We got a lot of people speaking discouragement to us. There's a recent study done by a place called the Gottman Institute, and a lot of other people have come to the same conclusion, but they measured conversations, just everyday conversations in our relationships, in marriages, at work, and what they found is in the United States of America, we have a ratio in everyday conversation of 6 critical comments to every 1 uplifting comment. 6 to 1. 6 to 1 is the ratio of discouragement to encouragement in our society. And that's kind of a mind-blowing figure, but you know what the sad part is? It's probably not shocking to any of us. None of you look shocked. Like we know in our workplaces, in our jobs, in our relationships with our families, with our spouses, with our kids, with our moms, with our dads, with our friends, with our neighbors, 6 to 1 seems about right. And so it's hard not to end up in the same place the Israelites ended up in Nehemiah chapter 4 because we got a lot of Sanballats and a lot of Tobiahs speaking discouragement into us. I think we can relate to him too because Nehemiah is so relatable. He's just a nobody. He's not important. He's not great. He's not particularly talented. He's just an average guy who's trying to live out the thing God called him to do in the world. I think so many of us can relate to that. Like we're not anything special. We're just nobodies trying to make the difference God invited us to make. Trying to do our jobs the best we can do them. Trying to lead in the places he's given us to lead. Trying to be the best people we can to our families and to our friends and to the people we work with. Trying really hard not to fail at the tasks that we've been given, but that's about it. And we look in the mirror and we realize like in the grand scheme of the world and the billions of people who live here, I'm just ridiculously insignificant. It's easy to feel that way and to look at our lives and feel like they don't matter, but some of us relate to Nehemiah because we feel like, I know that I'm a nobody and I just live in this small little corner of this vast globe, but I feel like God has called me to do something. You know, I don't know that I can make the kind of difference that some people make, but I think God's called me to do something here and now in the lives of the people around me to make a little bit of a difference, but it's hard. It's hard to do it. So I think we can relate to Nehemiah because he's just this average, everyday guy who felt like, man, I can make a difference for God in the world. God called me to do this. I think so many of us have been in that spot, and then we've tried to make that difference, and the people around us who should be encouraging us, the people around us who should be urging us on, end up being Sanballat and Tobiah. They don't understand it, and they discourage us, and we have conversations with them as we're trying to make a play for God in the world, to be a part of something, and that something might not always be easy. And 6 to 1 is a good ratio in conversations with them. And so it's really hard not to get discouraged, but we can relate to this space that the Israelites are in Nehemiah chapter 4. So what do we do with that? What do we do when we're discouraged? What do we do with the fact that that's just kind of a natural part of life when we're right there in that spot? Well, I think Nehemiah's response to the discouragement that he was starting to feel, to the discouragement that all his workers are starting to feel, gives us a really powerful picture of the way God invites us to respond to difficulty in our lives. You can find it in verse 14 of Nehemiah chapter 4. Everyone comes to him, they're like, we're beat and we're scared, we don't know what we can do. And then in verse 14, Nehemiah says this: after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. I love it, like in verse 19 through 21 at the very end, he says, then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out. We're widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. So we continued the work with half the men holding spears from the first light of dawn till the stars came out. I love this response. I think we can break it down to 2 big things Nehemiah does. Two things that define the way he approaches this problem in his life, that change the course and direction of the future of Nehemiah and the people of Judah and Jerusalem. Like it shifts from verse 4, or from chapter 4 onward. And it can shift in our lives as well. And those two things are this. The first step that we need to take is look up. Look up. We get discouraged when we take our eyes off of God. We start to look at the problems through the lens of our own inability, through the lens of our own limited ability, through the lens of our own fear and our own failure. When we stop looking at our Creator, when we stop looking at the one who's sovereign, and we start getting fixated on our problems, fixated on the rubble, fixated on our enemies, fixated on ourselves to the point that we can't look up or look out, it's easy to just be overcome by discouragement. But notice what Nehemiah does. In this moment of discouragement, he says, look up. Look to God who's great and awesome. Even that right there. Wouldn't that phrase just be a game changer for us every single day of our lives? If every time we felt frustrated, if every time something went wrong, if every time we got discouraged, we said, look to our God who's great and awesome. Nehemiah is saying, stop focusing on the problem and start looking at the one who's in control of it, the one who created you, the one who cares for you, the one who promises that he will fight for you. When you feel down, look up. I'll tell you what, when our gaze is fixated on God and what he's doing in our world through us, it changes everything. Like there's this incredibly energizing and motivating power to faith. So we got to look up. And number two, we got to press on. Press on. So Nehemiah takes his time out and he pauses to remember our God who's great and awesome. And then what does he do? He gets back to work. He heads straight back to the wall, and he encourages everybody, fight for this. Fight for it right now. Grab your trowels and your spears, because we're going to lay some bricks, and we're going to fight anybody who dares to stop us. It's time to get back to work. From dawn until we see the stars. Is it going to be hard work? Absolutely. Is it going to be simple? No. Do we have all the supplies we need? No. Do we have enemies that want to stop us? Yes. But it's time to get working on the stuff that God made us to do. And I'll tell you this, it is really, really difficult to remain discouraged when there's even the slightest bit of forward momentum in our lives. And sometimes we get frustrated. Sometimes we feel so beat down that we don't want to press on. We don't want to keep working. We don't want to get back to the wall that God's given us. We just want to quit and we just want to stop there. But if we'll do it as an act of obedience, if we will look up and press on, even the slightest, shortest, smallest step forward crushes discouragement in our lives because we're moving. So we got to look up and we got to press on. We got to crash forwards. Crash forwards. You guys know a group of rhinos is called a crash? It's pretty cool. There's like a pride of lions, a school of fish, a flock of seagulls. That's a band and also a group of seagulls. But a group of rhinos is called a crash. And it's for a reason, because they're huge, right? This is massive, muscular, huge beast with a giant horn, and rhinos can run 30 miles per hour. And that's fast. It's just a giant, scary beast coming at 30 miles per hour. But there's also something unique about rhinos. They can only see 30 feet in front of them. That's why they're called a crash, because just picture it. This huge, massive, scary, horned beast charging ahead at 30 miles per hour with no idea what lies at 31 feet. That's how Nehemiah dealt with discouragement. He crashed ahead. He didn't know exactly what was going to happen. He didn't know if Sanballat and Tobiah would attack. He had some spears in case they did. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew what God had called him to do, and he just crashed forward. That's how God invites us to deal with discouragement. It's how he invites the church to live and move and breathe and be in the world, to crash forward. I don't know, this is true for me. Honest moment, this is true for me, and I think it's probably true for a lot of us. Sometimes because we have not yet succeeded, and because we're afraid of a future that we can't see clearly. Terrified of what might lie ahead, we just stall out right where we are. We get so discouraged that we stand back up one less time than we got knocked down. And our lives just halt in that place. They become defined by that place. But what I want us to know this morning, what I want us to get fired up about this morning, is that no matter what our circumstances are, no matter how cloudy our future is, we can be encouraged. We can be filled up with courage, the type of courage that it takes to live out who God called us to be and to make the difference that God called us to make in this world. We can, if we respond to the things that tempt us toward discouragement by looking up and pressing on, because you don't have to know what is in front of you if you know who is leading you. I mean, this week's going to bring its share of trials. It is for me, it is for you, it is for all of us. I know that's true. But my prayer, my hope this week is that we'll walk out and our response will not be to choose the option of discouragement. Even if we're afraid, even if we're frustrated, even if we've failed, even if we're tired and exhausted and fried, my prayer is that we won't choose the option of discouragement, but instead we'll choose to look up and press on and crash forward no matter how difficult things get. Because if we do, when we do, we can sidestep this landmine of discouragement that is the single biggest weapon in our enemy's arsenal. And we can start living out the lives that God created us for in our relationships, in our work, everywhere that we go, every minute of every day. I think not only that, but we can be encouragers. Like if we choose this, if we start living out this, we can be a people that encourage others. In a broken world, we can be people that lift up all the discouraged people around us. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 25 says, whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. I love that. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Like if we choose that we're not going to get overcome by discouragement, but we're going to look up and press on, we can be people that encourage those around us. We can be people that flip the script on the 6-to-1 narrative of discouragement to encouragement in our lives, in our world. Like, what if we decided to do that? Just us. Who knows what the world around us is going to do? But what if those of us in this room decided, all right, Revision Church, we're going to go out and we're going to flip that narrative. We're going to balance out 6-to-1. Maybe we're going to flip it around entirely. And no matter what anybody does, we're going to be people who speak more encouragement than we speak discouragement. Think about what that might do in the lives of the people around us. Think about what it might do for us. My hope, my prayer is that this week, right here, right now, we will resolve to be a people who don't give in to discouragement, but decide like we are going to look up and we're going to press on. And we're going to be encouragers so we can lift up a discouraged world and help them know Jesus and follow him fully. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you. Just thank you for who you are. Thank you for being great and awesome, for being this God that we can look to, that we can have confidence in. Lord, I just pray that fatigue and failure, frustration and fear wouldn't lead us to discouragement, that we wouldn't look at our world through the lens of what we can't do, through the lens of the problems that are in front of us, but we'd look at it through the lens of your sovereignty and your holiness and your power and your might and your love. God, fire us up this week about who you created us to be and the things in this world you're inviting us to do. Let us just be a people that point those around us towards you, that encourage them, that lift them up as we get encouraged by taking our eyes off of our problems and off of our brokenness, by looking up and pressing on. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.